In northern British Columbia, the river runs black in early June. Campers pass through Fort Nelson, stopping for fuel, ice, and receipts. Most return. One did not. Ethan Mallory set his tent along the riverbank on June 12, 2011. By dawn, only charred fabric remained. His pack was gone. His boots were gone. The ground told more. Impressions half-washed by current, a second set pressed deeper. For weeks, the forest swallowed every lead. Reports listed him among dozens vanished in the corridor, left to rumor. But a single item, the scorched compass, survived. It moved from fire pit to evidence bag to courtroom. In the end, it spoke louder than witnesses. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The boreal forest in northern British Columbia held its silence the morning the call came in. A fisherman reported smoke rising from the riverbank just north of Fort Nelson on June 13, 2011. When responders reached the site, the fire had already collapsed. What remained was a ring of blackened soil, the frame of a camping tent warped by heat, and scattered shards of melted nylon. The victim was identified as Ethan Mallory, 29, traveling alone. His vehicle, a green pickup, was parked neatly at the gravel turnout 2 kilometers away. Inside were half-emptied grocery bags, folded maps, and a notebook with only the first page filled. A checklist of supplies. His backpack was missing. So were his boots. Investigators cordoned off the riverbank. A forensic photographer documented every angle. The soil beneath the ash showed deep depressions, wider than Mallory's size 10 boots. Nearby, the sand carried faint tread lines running parallel toward the water. Searchers measured the distance between impressions, 42 inches, consistent with a heavy adult male stride. On a rock at the fringe of the burned circle lay a compass. Its casing was blistered, its glass cracked, the dial frozen southeast. Initial officers bagged it, logged under exhibit tag 11-247. They noted trace flecks of metallic soot fused to the rim. Later analysis would confirm accelerant residue. The fire itself told a conflicting story. Nylon tents collapse in minutes, but char this extensive required sustained flame. Soil samples scraped from beneath the debris carried traces of petroleum hydrocarbons. The odor lingered faintly, even after rain the following day. A lab request was filed for chemical comparison. From a higher vantage on the riverbank, the waterline showed drag marks. Branches snapped cleanly at waist height suggested hurried passage. No blood was visible, but infrared sweep confirmed multiple thermal disturbances in the soil, as if more than one body had shifted weight across the ground. By noon, search coordinators deployed dogs. The animals circled, barked once, then pulled downstream. Their handlers marked the path, though scent broke off abruptly at a rock ledge. Beyond that point, the trail was lost to the river. Mallory's relatives in Alberta were notified the following day. They described him as cautious, meticulous with equipment, unlikely to mishandle a campfire. Officers returned to the site, collected a melted zipper pull, a scorched metal pot handle, and a char fragment of notebook paper. Only 3 legible letters survived. R.I.V. It could have been part of the word river. For Clara Holt, an independent journalist reviewing cold wilderness disappearances, the case file carried no human warmth. The photographs were precise, the logs impersonal. She clipped them into her binder, labeling the first tab, Mallory, 2011. To her, the compass became a fixed point, a survivor of fire and silence. That night, under fluorescent lab light, the evidence tech rotated the compass inside its bag. The cracked needle shifted once, then stopped. He sealed the bag, signed chain of custody, and placed it on the second shelf of the evidence vault. The shelf smelled faintly of smoke. Ethan Mallory's last known movements were pieced together from a sequence of receipts and low-resolution camera frames. On June 12th, a day before the burned tent was reported, he stopped at a gas station along Highway 97 in Fort Nelson. The transaction log recorded a fuel purchase at 8:42 a.m. Payment was made in cash, two $20 bills, both later recovered in register counts. The clerk remembered him vaguely. A man of medium build, wearing a gray jacket, polite but quiet. What stood out was that he asked about trail conditions further north, specifically along the Sikani Chief River. The question struck her later because few solo travelers chose that route. Beside the fuel receipt was another slip. A convenience store purchase time-stamped 9:15 a.m. It listed water bottles, a pack of jerky, and a disposable lighter. Investigators logged the receipt under Exhibit 11 to 250. Forensic chemists swabbed the paper for oil traces. None were detected. The lighter, however, was never found among the ruins of the tent. Security camera footage offered a sharper clue. At 9:13 a.m., Mallory's pickup pulled into the store lot. He stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and walked inside. Seconds later, another figure moved into the far corner of the frame. The image was blurred, washed by glare, but the silhouette suggested a taller individual. Investigators debated whether the figure entered or merely passed by. The frame cut abruptly when the lens auto-adjusted. Detectives froze that single still. Shoe print analysis later compared the blurred figure's stride to impressions lifted from the riverbank. Scales suggested a match: wide heel, heavy pressure. The outsider, Clara Holt, retraced these steps months later. She spoke with the same clerk, who described remembering the compass more clearly than the man. Mallory had placed it on the counter while counting cash. Its brass rim glinted beneath fluorescent light. When he picked it up, she noticed a scratch across the back, as if something sharp had dragged diagonally. From Fort Nelson, Mallory's path extended into unmarked territory. His vehicle odometer reading, documented by investigators, suggested an additional 60 kilometers of driving before being abandoned at the gravel turnout. That number, recorded as 198,432 kilometers, aligned with road distances north of the settlement. Officers canvassed the turnout. Tire tread marks showed his pickup had parked evenly. A second set of treads was noted, overlapping partially, indicating another vehicle had stopped briefly. The impressions lacked full depth, suggesting a lighter truck. Molding cast from the site captured cross-groove patterns. These casts would later link directly to a suspect. The line of movement seemed methodical. Gas station, convenience store, gravel turnout, then riverbank. Every step left a forensic fragment, as though Mallory's journey had been silently shadowed. Clara pinned photocopies of the receipts to her board. The compass photograph sat at the center. She drew a line from the gas station timestamp to the fire report the following morning. In between was a void of 23 hours. That gap became the case's central cavity, a silence in which a predator could hide. At the district detachment, the original video was archived on a disc labeled FN Convenience 2011. The disc carried scratches across its surface, but the 913 frame remained intact. Analysts zoomed until pixels collapsed. All they could confirm was that the second figure's head tilted toward Mallory as he passed. The evidence bag holding the compass was stored one shelf higher. The blurred figure lingered, one step behind, never identified. Search operations began within 12 hours of the burned tent report. By dawn on June 14th, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police coordinated with local volunteer teams and a helicopter unit. They established a grid that extended 2 kilometers upstream and 3 downstream. The helicopter's thermal camera scanned treetops and open clearings. The display flickered with occasional heat signatures: moose, bear, smaller mammals. None matched the size or movement of a human. On the ground, dog teams moved along the river edge. Handlers recorded in their logs that the animals alerted strongly near a rock shelf 200 meters south of the campsite, then lost the trail abruptly. Evidence technicians collected what little remained outside the burn zone. A piece of torn fabric, olive green, clung to a low branch. It was tagged Exhibit 11-263. Microscopic analysis later revealed it to be polyester, fibers melted at the edge, consistent with exposure to flame. Another fragment, a steel zipper pull, lay in the silt. Its teeth were fused shut, Both were packaged and sealed. The search produced one object of unsettling clarity, a flannel shirt, torn across the back, recovered from driftwood lodged midstream. Its fibers bore heat damage but no bloodstains. The shirt matched descriptions given by Mallory's sister when investigators asked about his wardrobe. DNA swabbing collected epithelial cells along the collar, confirmed later as his. Still, no body surfaced. Divers swept the deeper pools with sonar, but the riverbed returned only stones and timber. The water level was high from snowmelt, current pushing at 6 knots. If Mallory had entered the river, recovery would be unlikely. The outsider, Clara Holt, obtained copies of the canine search logs. She highlighted the passage where one handler noted the dogs reacted as if circling more than one scent. The note read, agitated, pulled in opposing directions, then stopped. It was a detail omitted from the public press release. When Clara examined the evidence photos, her attention fixed again on the compass. In one shot, the scorched device sat beside the melted zipper pole. The compass rim showed a faint streak of discoloration, metallic and granular. Analysts later found the streak to be paint, chemical composition matching firearms coating. Night fell on the 3rd day of search. Volunteers withdrew. The case entered its static phase. Missing person without recovery. Official statements cited wilderness hazards. Possibility of animal attack. Yet the burned tent, the accelerant traces, and the missing gear left gaps that could not be filled by nature alone. In a later interview, one rescuer admitted noticing an unusual scrap in the ashes, a half-charred notebook page, the one with the letters R.I.V. The fragment disintegrated upon handling. Still, it was logged photographically. That fragment was the last direct message from Mallory. By week's end, the file grew thicker, but answers did not. Maps hung with red twine over the search office table, each line tracing where Mallory was not. In Clara's notes, one line underlined twice, "Fire does not erase footprints." On stone, a flannel sleeve clung damp, scorched, and silent. Wildlife officers were brought in to provide clarity. Their task? Determine if an animal attack could have caused the disappearance. The tent's collapse, the torn shirt, the drag marks by the river. Each detail was examined through that lens. A senior biologist compared plaster casts of the impressions found near the fire circle. One bore the outline of claw marks, but the spacing was inconsistent. A grizzly's front paw measures wider, deeper. The impression here was narrow, with a uniform pattern suggesting pressure from a boot sole rather than pads and claws. The biologist's report was blunt, not consistent with bear or wolf. Meanwhile, a second analysis reviewed the flannel shirt fibers. Bears typically tear fabric with ragged force. Under magnification, the fibers here were cut sharply at angles. Forensic textile experts concluded the tears were mechanical, made by a blade, not claws. Exhibit 11-263 was updated to reflect instrumental damage. A firearm residue test was performed on soil samples gathered 10 meters from the riverbank. The results came back positive for nitrite compounds, the byproducts of gunpowder discharge. Investigators noted the soil discoloration had been overlooked during initial sweeps. The outsider, Clara Holt, cross-referenced these findings with regional hunting reports. In 2010, just 1 year earlier, conservation officers had filed citations against poachers in the same corridor. Witnesses then described hearing gunshots at night. The pattern hinted less at a bear's territory and more at a human predator's. Returning to the compass, forensic chemists found additional layers of evidence. When swabbed, its rim carried not only accelerant residue, but also microscopic flecks of enamel paint. Ballistics experts identified the compound, a protective coating used on rifle barrels. The compass had likely come into contact with a firearm surface. Clara arranged the photographs across her workspace. She pinned the compass image above the shirt, drew a line downward, then circled the word blade. The emerging diagram told a story no animal could author. Local rumor continued to insist otherwise. Residents spoke of wolves bold enough to shadow camps. Hunters swore of grizzlies descending to the river that spring. Yet the forensic files built their own testimony. A deliberate fire, a cut shirt, firearm discharge, paint transfer. Each point converged. By midsummer, the case had stalled. No body recovered, no suspect identified. Officials leaned toward declaring wilderness fatality. Clara, reviewing late at night, wrote in her notebook, "Nature does not leave rifle paint." The compass was moved once more. Now logged as Exhibit 11247A, it joined the growing box of artifacts sealed with evidence tape. The lid closed with a sharp snap. Claw marks failed, but military boots fit perfectly. The case file thickened, yet the silence around Ethan Mallory's disappearance remained. By August 2011, Clara Holt shifted her focus from physical traces to patterns. She began reviewing decades of archived reports from Fort Nelson and the surrounding wilderness. What she uncovered was not one isolated case, but a cluster. 3 other disappearances had occurred within a 30-kilometer stretch of river between 1997 and 2009. A hiker in 1997, last seen collecting firewood. A hunter in 2004, vehicle abandoned at a turnout. A tourist fisherman in 2009, his gear found burned near driftwood. Each file contained unresolved threads, and each had been closed under wilderness hazard, or presumed animal predation. Clara overlaid the coordinates on a topographical map. When she connected the markers, they curved along the river like a crescent. The burned tent from 2011 fell directly on that arc. Forensic geography, a discipline she studied through case manuals, emphasized clustering as a sign of targeted hunting grounds, not random accident. She requested access to internal RCMP summaries. Most were redacted, but one phrase slipped through in an officer's handwritten margin: possible poaching overlap. It was the first official hint that human activity might underlie the disappearances. The recurring symbol, the compass, tied to this broader context. When Clara reviewed older evidence inventories, she noted a detail from the 2004 Hunter case, a compass missing from the victim's recovered pack. No trace of it was logged. The omission gnawed at her. She underlined the word compass on her board twice. Forensic anchors grew sharper. Soil samples from the 2009 fisherman's site were reanalyzed in 2011 under new lab standards. They showed trace hydrocarbons, accelerant, just as Mallory's fire ring had. The pattern repeated: isolated victim, burned gear, missing essentials, accelerant trace. Clara traveled north again, this time interviewing retired search leader Jonas Reddick. He recalled hearing gunshots echoing through the valley during the 2004 operation. At the time, he dismissed them as distant hunters. Now, he considered the possibility they were connected. He pointed Clara to an overlooked trail spur leading toward a concealed river crossing. That spur was where Mallory's footprints had partially washed out. It was also where volunteers had reported dogs reacting strangely, pulling in opposing directions. Clara annotated her notes. Access corridor, predator route. She photographed the map again, the compass image pinned above it. In her article drafts, she described it not as a navigational tool, but as a marker, an object that resurfaced whenever the forest swallowed someone whole. At the detachment evidence room, the burned compass sat in its sealed bag, placed atop folders from the other 3 cases. No one else noticed the symmetry. Clara did. On the board in her apartment, the red twine circled tighter. The map revealed a crescent of vanished lives along the river. By early autumn, the narrative of accident or animal attack had thinned. The evidence pointed elsewhere, and the fire itself became the central question. Why would a predator, human or otherwise, ignite a blaze that risked exposure? The forensic laboratory delivered its full report in September 2011. Soil samples from beneath the tent contained significant hydrocarbon residues, specifically consistent with diesel fuel. Capillary gas chromatography confirmed the signature. Mid-range alkanes, additives unique to commercial diesel blends used in logging equipment. The lab marked the finding in bold: accelerant applied directly. For investigators, this meant the fire was not incidental. It was controlled. Someone carried or accessed diesel and poured it across the fabric to eliminate evidence. Yet no fuel canisters had been recovered. The compass, again, played a role. Under UV light, its rim showed streaks fluorescing differently from soot. A chemist identified traces of petroleum distillate embedded in the scorched metal. The object had been contaminated during or after the fire. Clara logged this detail with care. Her board now carried 3 columns: fire, fuel, firearm. She then traced procurement channels. Diesel was common among logging crews in the region. Purchase logs from Fort Nelson recorded multiple cash sales in May and June 2011. One in particular stood out: a 20-liter jerry can bought on June 11th, a day before Mallory vanished. The receipt bore no name, only an anonymous cash mark. Investigators filed it under Exhibit 11 to 311. Clara visited the supplier. The clerk vaguely recalled the buyer, a man taller than average, quiet, wearing a hunting cap. No vehicle description. But the timing aligned. The hypothesis formed. Someone tracked Mallory, disabled him, staged a fire to erase struggle, and removed possessions to simulate theft or disappearance. Predatory behavior, not random hazard. A secondary forensic anchor arrived from the charred notebook fragment labeled RAV. Chemical enhancement revealed additional faint strokes, possibly RV. Analysts suggested the word could have been river. If Mallory had been writing an observation, it was lost. But the fragment became symbolic, a half-buried warning from the victim. Clara considered the psychology of fire as concealment. Predators used flames to erase, but often left signature objects behind. The compass, surviving despite heat, had not been consumed, almost as if the fire's architect overlooked it or discarded it deliberately. In mid-October, the RCMP circulated internal memos acknowledging the case as suspicious human-caused death. This shifted the file from missing person to major crime. Clara gained access to one such memo through a retired officer. The wording was stark. Evidence inconsistent with animal predation, human interference suspected. The wilderness swallowed its sound again. Yet the file grew heavier. A burned tent, a half-word in ash, a compass scarred with accelerant, a receipt for diesel. Each piece aligned like coordinates on a map, drawing the outline of a hunter who had walked unseen. The river kept moving, washing clean the banks. Diesel trace glowed under ultraviolet, binding fire to intent. By winter, Clara Holt turned her attention to voices long ignored, those who had worked the forests before the case was ever filed. She met with Jonas Reddick, a retired park warden who had patrolled the corridor during the 2000s. His memory was steady, his words delivered with the detachment of someone who had walked those banks too often. He recalled the summer of 2010, 1 year before Mallory's disappearance. While monitoring fishing licenses, he had camped within 5 kilometers of the later burn site. On 2 consecutive nights, he heard sharp cracks, rifle reports echoing through the valley around 11 p.m. At the time, he noted them in his patrol log, but dismissed them as poachers. The entries, rediscovered in 2011, were added to Mallory's file as Exhibit 11 to 356. Reddick also described finding a hollow tree used as a hide. Inside it, lodged in the bark, was a deformed bullet jacket. He had pocketed it, logged it, then forgotten it when no case emerged. Clara persuaded him to retrieve it from his personal archives. The fragment, turned over to analysts, proved consistent with a .30-06 hunting round. Forensic comparison deepened the unease. The bullet's striation marks, though degraded, aligned with partial impressions found in soil samples near Mallory's tent. Someone had discharged a rifle close to the riverbank. The compass entered the circle again. When examined under spectrographic analysis, its scorched casing bore microscopic specks of enamel matching the polymer coats applied to commercial hunting rifles. The compass had made direct contact with a weapon. Clara connected these threads: rifle residue in soil, bullet fragment in bark, paint on compass. Each strand pointed toward deliberate armed presence in the corridor. She wrote in her notes, "Predator uses fire to erase, firearm to strike, compass as echo." Whispers in town added weight. Hunters spoke of a man named Caleb Drury, known for pushing boundaries of the law. He had once been fined for poaching grizzly hides. His name surfaced in more than one account, but his record showed no convictions beyond the fine. Reddick's log, however, became pivotal. It marked place, time, and the sound of shots. His words gave the geography a pulse. Predators were not rumor, but residents of the woods. By late December, Clara submitted an article draft under the working title, The Predator's Corridor. Editors rejected it, citing lack of closure. She kept digging. In the evidence vault, the compass remained sealed in its bag. The scratches on its rim caught the fluorescent light, thin lines that ran like coordinates etched into brass. The bullet jacket, twisted and blackened, fit the silence too well. The investigation shifted focus from geography to individuals. Among the names whispered in Fort Nelson, one recurred with persistence. Caleb Drury. A hunter with a record of citations, he had once been caught with untagged pelts in 2008. Charges had been reduced, fines paid, but his reputation lingered. Detectives pulled his history. Drury owned a cabin 30 kilometers west of the river corridor, accessible by logging road. His license purchases matched a steady pattern: ammunition, fuel, trapping supplies. In June 2011, store logs confirmed he had bought a 20-liter can of diesel. The purchase was dated June 11th, 24 hours before Ethan Mallory's disappearance. The receipt, unsigned but stamped, entered the record as Exhibit 11402. Clara traced further. Interviews with locals described Drury as solitary, often moving with a hunting rifle across his back. One witness recalled him bragging that city campers don't last out there. The words sat uneasily when set against the burned tent on the riverbank. Forensic anchoring grew sharper. Tire casts taken from the gravel turnout, long stored in the evidence freezer, were compared with impressions lifted from Drury's truck. The cross-groove patterns aligned. The partial overlap suggested his vehicle had parked in the same turnout as Mallory's pickup. Analysts documented the match with side-by-side photographs. Chain of custody signed. The compass entered again. Clara noted that Drury had once purchased outdoor gear in town, including a compass logged in store inventory with a batch of brass-rimmed models. Serial fragments etched on Mallory's burned compass aligned with that product line. The probability of coincidence narrowed. Investigators secured a warrant. A search of Drury's cabin revealed scattered camping equipment, spent shell casings, and clothing stained with oil. But one item drew immediate attention: a receipt book tucked in a drawer. On its pages were scribbled fuel purchases, ammunition tallies, and dates. June 11th, 2011 was circled with a black pen. Clara reviewed copies of the findings. She fixed on the compass photograph again, its cracked face mirrored against the receipt ink. The object's role transformed. No longer just Mallory's tool, but a bridge between victim and predator. Still, Drury denied involvement when first approached. He claimed the diesel was for generators, the turnout marks coincidence, the timing irrelevant. His words echoed the rehearsed denials of someone long familiar with scrutiny. Yet the evidence box grew heavier. Accelerant match, tire cast match, receipt overlap, hunting reputation. Step by step, the net closed. The forest where Mallory's tent had burned no longer whispered of animals. It whispered of men who used rifles as shadows. The tire cast and receipt closed like jaws on his name. The warrant for Caleb Drury's storage barn turned the investigation from suspicion into certainty. On January 14, 2012, RCMP officers entered the corrugated metal structure at the edge of his property. The air smelled of oil and damp soil. Within minutes, they located a backpack shoved behind stacked lumber. The pack was identified as belonging to Ethan Mallory. Inside were a flannel shirt sleeve, camping utensils, and a water bottle engraved with his initials, EM. A forensic team swabbed the fabric for blood. Results confirmed human origin. DNA comparison against a toothbrush collected from Mallory's apartment returned a direct match. Exhibit 12015 sealed the connection. Nearby, investigators found a heavy jacket balled into a crate. On its cuff was a dried stain. Luminol testing glowed blue, later confirmed as Mallory's blood. Analysts also retrieved a spent shell casing beneath the floorboards, caliber 30-06. Its tool marks bore striking similarity to the deformed bullet Jonas Reddick had once logged. The compass appeared once more. During cataloging, an evidence officer noticed a faint indentation on the scorched rim, a partial serial. When compared to purchase logs, it aligned with a shipment of brass compasses sold to a Fort Nelson outfitter. Drury had purchased gear from that same batch 2 years earlier. Clara highlighted the alignment in her notes. She drew a line from the serial number to the fuel receipt and circled Drury's name. The outsider's role crystallized. Clara was no longer piecing folklore. She was reconstructing a chain of custody that law enforcement had nearly buried. Her board showed arrows converging on one point: Drury's barn. Drury, confronted with the evidence, claimed the items had been planted. He offered no explanation for the blood-stained jacket or the DNA-bearing flannel. The officers documented his words, time-stamped 3:45 p.m., audio file archived. His denial only deepened the weight of artifacts. Forensic technicians logged everything meticulously: backpack, flannel, jacket, casing, each photographed against scale markers, each sealed under unique exhibit numbers. The box of evidence now read like a ledger of Mallory's final hours. Still, one absence remained: the body. Without recovery, prosecutors hesitated. The family wanted certainty. The court demanded proof of death. The search radius widened once more, focused now by Drury's known hunting trails. In Clara's apartment, the compass image took center place again. She wrote a line beneath it: "Every predator leaves a trail, even when fire tries to erase it." In the evidence vault, the bagged compass rested atop the newly added exhibits, a silent witness. Blood confirmed identity, but the river still held the body. The turning point arrived in late February 2012. Under mounting pressure, investigators secured a second search warrant, this time to scour the river corridor with Drury present. He remained under surveillance but unshackled, escorted by 2 officers. For hours he denied knowledge, repeating that the forest eats what it wants. Then, in the gray hush of late afternoon, his story cracked. Confronted with the backpack DNA and the fuel receipt, Drury shifted tone. He claimed Mallory had started a fire himself and wandered into the woods. When pressed further, he faltered, his gaze fixed on the river bend, and his voice lowered. "You won't find him whole." Officers marked the spot where Drury paused. Ground-penetrating radar swept the area. The screen returned a sharp anomaly 2 meters beneath sandy soil. Shovels struck first gravel, then a layer of disturbed earth. At 6:15 p.m., skeletal remains surfaced. The body was partially wrapped in tarp, bound with cord. Soil samples lifted from beneath the remains matched the same hydrocarbon traces found at the tent site. Forensic anthropologists identified blunt force trauma to the skull, fracture consistent with a strike from a rifle butt. Dental comparison against Mallory's dental records confirmed identity within 48 hours. The compass returned once again. During autopsy prep, the examiner placed Exhibit 11 to 247A beside the body for photographic scale. Its scorched rim reflected the fluorescent lights across Mallory's fractured skull. The juxtaposition was chilling. A survivor object beside the silenced victim. Ballistics experts tested the .30-06 casing from Drury's barn against his seized rifle. The striation marks aligned with high probability. The weapon was logged as Exhibit 12-041. The accelerant residues on tarp fibers matched diesel profiles identical to Drury's recorded purchase. Forensic anchors converged: DNA, tool marks, accelerant chemistry, weapon match, and Drury's partial admission. Prosecutors now had body, cause of death, and link to suspect. Clara watched from the perimeter of the dig site. She noted the silence of the river as officers lifted the tarp. In her notes she wrote, "Predator's ground gave him up. Fire failed. Soil spoke." At the morgue, pathologists documented Mallory's injuries in clinical detail. The primary trauma was cranial fracture. Secondary abrasions indicated restraint. Toxicology detected no foreign substances, ruling out sedation. The conclusion was stark: blunt force homicide. The riverbank where the tent had burned now bore a new marker: yellow tape tied to a branch above fresh earth. The skull fracture told a story fire could not erase. The trial of Caleb Drury opened in Prince George Provincial Court in May 2013. The gallery filled with reporters, Mallory's family, and a silent scattering of locals who remembered the burned tent by the river. Clara Holt sat in the back row, her binder heavy with photocopies and maps. The prosecution's case unfolded with precision. Exhibit by exhibit, they constructed a chain that tied Drury to the disappearance and death. First came the receipts. Fuel purchased June 11, 2011. Then the tire cast, shown side by side with the impressions lifted from the gravel turnout. The jury leaned forward when the photographs aligned perfectly. Next, forensic analysts detailed the DNA results. They described the flannel sleeve from Drury's barn, the epithelial cells along the collar, the luminol glow on the jacket cuff. Each was matched conclusively to Ethan Mallory. The courtroom screens displayed microscopic images of fibers and fluorescent stains, sterile yet damning. Then came the compass. The charred device was lifted from its bag, held up in gloved hands. Jurors studied the cracked face, the needle fixed southeast. The prosecutor explained the residue. Diesel traces fused to brass, flecks of firearm paint embedded in its rim. He noted the serial fragments aligned with Drury's known purchase line. It became not just a relic, but a signature. Ballistics testimony followed. The .30-06 casing from Drury's barn was matched to his rifle. The striation marks, projected onto the wall, formed parallel ridges identical to the deformed bullet Jonas Reddick had found years earlier. Experts explained the fracture on Mallory's skull, consistent with a strike from that same rifle's butt. Drury's defense argued coincidence and contamination. They claimed others had access to the barn, that artifacts were planted, that the compass could not be proven to belong to Mallory. Yet each denial weakened under the weight of overlapping anchors. Mallory's sister testified quietly, describing his meticulous habits, his distrust of open fires, his care with equipment. Her words stripped away the idea of accident. She closed her statement by recalling the compass he carried since childhood, a gift from their father. Clara noted how the room changed. The evidence was scientific, cold. But when the compass passed from gloved hand to jury bench, silence fell. Objects carried weight beyond data. By the third week, the verdict was inevitable. Prosecutors had transformed fragments, receipts, soil samples, DNA strands, into a coherent ledger of predation. Each piece returned to the same locus, Drury. In the evidence cart, the compass sat at the top, its cracked glass reflecting courtroom light. Jurors stared at the compass, its silence louder than testimony. On June 3, 2013, the jury returned after less than 8 hours of deliberation. Their decision was unanimous, guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Caleb Drury to life imprisonment with no parole eligibility for 18 years. The words carried no flourish. They landed with the weight of inevitability. For Ethan Mallory's family, closure arrived in fragments. His sister received his backpack, flannel sleeve, and the engraved water bottle. Each item was returned under a release form, sealed in plastic. The compass, however, remained in state custody. It was declared a central exhibit, archived indefinitely in the evidence vault. Clara Holt filed her final article that month. She wrote not of Drury's guilt, but of the forest as a hunting ground shaped by silence. Her piece described how forensic traces, diesel signatures, tire impressions, DNA strands, spoke louder than rumor or denial. At the center she placed the compass, the one object that survived both fire and concealment. The trial transcripts entered the public record. They documented each anchor, fuel receipt, tire cast, DNA swabs, firearm match. Together they painted a ledger of predation. They also revealed systemic gaps, how earlier disappearances had been dismissed, how warnings had been ignored. In the official closing statement, the Crown prosecutor admitted, "This case demonstrates the consequences of overlooking patterns. Predators thrive in silence." Mallory's remains were interred in Alberta under overcast skies. The ceremony was brief. A photograph showed his sister holding the returned water bottle, its initials catching pale light. The compass, meanwhile, was boxed and labeled Exhibit 11 to 247A. It now rested in a steel shelf beneath fluorescent tubes, its cracked face angled upward. The needle remained fixed southeast, unmoving, indifferent to time. For Clara, that image lingered most. A survivor object sealed in plastic, carrying the geography of violence within its scratches. She closed her binder and slid it onto her shelf. Spine marked simply, Mallory, 2011. The wilderness swallowed its echoes once again. The scorched compass reflected cold fluorescence inside the archive vault.